chamber, like fish have two chamber hearts, but otherwise they are kind of similar too. But four chamber is better. I'll explain why in the lecture. You'll see it gives you some advantages. But anyway, so what you can see from outside, first let's name like the basically like kind of like landmarks. The tip of the heart is called apex. Apex basically means the tip, even though it's facing down, it's not like this. And then this part, the white part, this is the base. Then on the outside, you can see like little separations. One separation goes like this, and other ones go like that. And this is called sulcus, kind of like in the brain. If you remember the brain anatomy, they have those separations called sulcus and sulci. So that's this is called interventricular sulcus, and here is coronary sulcus that goes around. You can see it actually more on the back, like little indentation. So the interventricular sulcus separates the right side from the left side, specifically the right ventricle from the left ventricle. And the coronary sulcus that goes like this separates ventricles on the bottom from atria on the top. So basically, right ventricle, left ventricle, here's right atrium. See, like this structure is right atrium, and this structure along this back is left atrium. We'll see how the blood goes through it, and we'll talk about this later. But basically, briefly, it goes in the right atrium, goes in the right ventricle, comes out, goes to the lungs, come back to the left atrium, goes to the left ventricle, goes to the body, come back to the right ventricle, right atrium. So, okay, so basically, here is the right atrium, and this structure is called auricle, right? Auricle. Auricle means ear, right? So these are little ears of the heart. This is left atrium, and this is left auricle. So auricle is actually part of the atrium. It's connected on the inside. When you do the sheep hearts, you can actually, the way to explore it, you can put your finger in the glove and trace it. You can feel like it goes even from the atrium to the auricle. On the surface of the heart, you can see the blood vessels. These are so-called coronary blood vessels, coronary arteries and veins, and they supply the heart itself with blood because heart is a very active organ. It's always beating. It needs a lot of oxygen and nutrients that come through these vessels. The blood inside the heart, it does not supply that much vessels. It actually needs special vessels to go into the muscle. And if vessels get blocked, if coronary artery gets blocked, person has heart pain and may have a heart attack. That's the main reason for blockage of coronary artery. So, and blue ones are coronary veins, and the veins collect the blood from the muscle. It goes back into the heart, but first it collects into this big vein on the back. This is called coronary sinus. And then it opens, the coronary sinus opens into the right atrium. So on the outside, you also see the large vessels. The two main vessels that come into the heart from the body is the superior vena cava. We learned these names, so you know the names now, you see where they go. This is superior vena cava that carries blood from the upper part of the body, arms, chest, and like head and neck. And this part is just like a hole, but this is inferior vena cava, so it carries blood from everything below the diaphragm, so like all your internal organs and the legs. So it goes in the right atrium. Now inside it goes to the right ventricle. We'll see there are valves there and other things. But then it comes out of the right ventricle through the pulmonary, you have this pulmonary tract, which is an artery. But you see the color, so these are blue, right? They are blue because they carry deoxygenated blood. They just came from the body, because blood, it changes color a little bit depending on the amount of oxygen. It's not as distinct like these colors, but it's really bright red if it has high oxygen content, and it becomes more kind of like purplish red if it becomes like low oxygen content. When the blood goes from the lungs, it has high oxygen content, goes to tissues use oxygen, now it's low oxygen. Comes back to the heart through these veins. But in the heart, nothing happens to it in terms of oxygen, so it still stays blue. But this vessel is actually an artery. Because arteries, in the textbooks, normally like veins are blue, arteries are red, right? But in fact, what defines the artery is not what kind of blood, how much oxygen it has, but the direction of blood flow. If it goes towards the heart, it's a vein. If it goes away from the heart, it's an artery. So in this case, this is an artery, but it carries deoxygenated blood, so it looks blue, right? So pulmonary trunk. It branches into two pulmonary arteries. One goes to each lung, right? So these are pulmonary arteries. So it goes to lungs, gets oxygenated, turns red, and it goes back to pulmonary veins. From each lung you have two pulmonary veins, so these are pulmonary veins. And they come into the left atrium. From left atrium inside the heart goes to the left ventricle, and now from the ventricle it comes out through the aorta. So aorta is an artery, and that's the aorta. That's the main artery of your body. So it goes up a little bit, like this little part. It's called ascending aorta. It's pretty short. Then you have a curved aortic arch and some branches here. And from here down it goes, from here now it goes down and it becomes descending aorta. The first part of descending aorta is inside your chest. That's called descending thoracic aorta. So it goes like this, then goes through diaphragm, and now it's called descending abdominal aorta. We saw that both in models and cats. So you also need to know these vessels. So basically, they're just little stubs, but we can compare it to the model, because on the model, they also have hearts and have some details, but not as much as these models. So I'm going to show you on the model in a minute. But the first one, just briefly, the first one is called brachiocephalic trunk, and that branches into vessel that goes to your arm, subclavian artery, and the one that goes to your head, right carotid artery. And these two are separate, so basically this pulmonary trunk, it's like a combination of these two vessels for the right. But on the left they're separate, and the middle one, it's your left carotid artery goes to your head, and this is left subclavian goes to the arm, like this. So now let's look on inside. There's one more feature here on the outside, but I'll show that to you later because it's related to something on the inside I want to see. So you open like this on the inside, and now you see the chambers. And basically, also another thing that you need to know, and we ask that on exam sometimes, is the structure of the heart wall itself. So that's like a heart wall, and it includes 3 layers. The outside smooth layer, it's called epicardium. It's just like a little bit of a connective tissue and a simple squamous epithelium. Then the main layer here is the muscle that is called myocardium. So myo, muscle, cardio, heart. And inside is endocardium. Again, it's a thin membrane with a simple squamous epithelium. And this endocardium is very similar to the lining of blood vessels. In fact, it becomes lining of blood vessels. It changes name, it becomes endothelium, but it's the same type of tissue. Anyway, as far as the tissues, it's like 3 layers, but as far as anatomy, this is the outside wall of the right ventricle. Here is the right ventricle. This is the left ventricle, outside wall, and here is the interventricular septum. Septum means wall, interventricular means separates ventricles, right ventricle and left ventricle. Or right ventricle, remember the blood comes to the right atrium, then goes to the right ventricle, then goes to the lungs. But when the blood comes to left ventricle, left atrium goes to left ventricle, it goes to the whole body. So it takes a lot more energy to pump the blood to your whole body compared to just the lungs. So left ventricle is a lot thicker, it's much stronger ventricle than the right. And that's why you can see that basically left ventricle goes more tip, but a little bit like on the side. You can see that even better from the outside. You see that's a left ventricle to the tip and the right ventricle like this on the side. The volume of blood that they pump is the same, but the pressure is much higher on the left side. So when you measure like blood pressure with blood pressure cuff, you measure the systemic pressure, which is high. It's very hard to measure pulmonary pressure because it's all inside. You need special equipment for that. But anyway, so what else is here? So here is the atrium. So the atrium has like these two veins, superior vena cava, inferior vena cava. And between the atrium and the ventricle, there's a valve. So you see this structure, that's a valve. And it has like several names, but they're all basically the same. First of all, of course, it's atrioventricular AV valve, because between atrium and the ventricle, that therefore AV valve. But specifically the one on the right side, it's called tricuspid valve, because cusps are like little flaps. See, like there's one flap, there's another one. They kind of like, they come together like this, like little flaps, and they open and they close. And so, because these flaps are very thin, in order for them to stay closed when the ventricle is contracting, basically they have these fibers which are called chordae tendinae. That's a Latin name, but literally it means heart strings. What they do is they prevent the valve from opening backwards. So it's like basically it goes like this, blood goes down, it opens, but when the blood tries to go up, it closes. But technically it can go like this and be opened back backwards. But those strings, they keep it so it does not do that. And the strings attached to they're attached to the special structures inside the ventricles, because see, that's the atrium and valve is between them, so that's the ventricle. They're attached to these, looks like little flexible fingers or sausages. These are called papillary muscles. That's part of the wall of the heart, but not smooth, but have these like sausage-like structures. They also contract when they pull down on the strings and prevents the valve to like opening backwards. Also, basically, you can see like there are these ridges here. They're called trabecular carni. Means like basically carni means meat, and trabecular means like lines or something like this. Basically, inside it's not completely smooth, but the lining is very smooth, the endothelium, but it's not just like smooth surface. So now, when the heart goes from the ventricle, there's also a problem to prevent it from going backwards, because the ventricle contracts and then it relaxes. That's called systole when the heart contracts, and diastole when it relaxes. So at the exit of the ventricle, there's another valve. You can see it here, so that's the right side. Heart is kind of like complex because it's not like all flat, like you can draw it on the page and make it flat, but it's all like, it's kind of like, it's twisted. You know, you don't have like right ventricle, left ventricle, instead of it's more like this. So, and you can see how right ventricle basically goes like that, but this is the valve. This is called semilunar valve, or SL valve, because it has these flaps which are kind of like half-moon shaped. There are 3 of them, and they make like this sign, kind of like a Mercedes-Benz sign, like this. You can see, like these are the flaps. So basically, when the blood is pushing from the bottom, the flaps open when the ventricle is contracting, right? But when the ventricle relaxes, you still have high pressure in the vessel, it pushes back, and these flaps close, and blood pretty much doesn't go back, it just keeps going forward. So, basically, this is called pulmonary semilunar valve, because pulmonary goes to the pulmonary trunk. Now, on the other side, it's a similar thing. There are some small differences, but it's the same principle. Blood goes from the left atrium to left ventricle. To prevent it from going backwards, we have a valve here, but this one, it has 2 flaps. So here's 3 flaps, so it's called tricuspid, but this is 2 flaps. It's called bicuspid AV valve. So the left AV valve is bicuspid valve. Another name for it is mitral valve, because bicuspid, you have like 2 cusps, they come like this, and it looks like a pointy hat that cardinals in Catholic Church wear. And that's why it's called, basically, it's called mitral valve. Mitra, that's what that hat is. No cardinal's hat. because basically most people probably don't know what they look like, but you can look it up. But anyway, so in this case, how to remember, I mean, I kind of think it's like, okay, like the valve is kind of like backwards. So this is weaker, but it has 3 cusps. You think like for stronger one, you need more, right? But this is like a weaker ventricle, but it has 3 cusps, but this is a stronger ventricle, but it has 2 cusps, right? So, in the same way here, they have chordae tendineae, which attach to these are papillary muscles. You can see like this one or that one. And now, when the blood goes in the ventricles, and again, it's like, you see it's all twisted and it's hard to see, but if you look inside like this, you see the semilunar valve on the exit point from the left ventricle, and remember to which vessel it goes? To aorta. So aorta, ascending aorta, has aortic semilunar valve. And then basically blood goes to the aorta, and that's all. So we need to know a couple of other things that you can see inside the heart. One of them is this red spot. What this is, it's the opening of the coronary sinus. Because it's a vein, remember all the veins go to the right atrium, so that's the opening of coronary sinus. And another structure in the right atrium, you can see this white oval spot, that's called fossa ovalis. That's like a scar tissue, but it used to be a hole in embryo when the baby, before the baby, like fetus basically, before it was born, the right and left atrium are connected. And that has to do with the fact that babies don't use their lungs, so the blood bypasses the lungs. They still need the heart to circulate the blood, but the blood doesn't go to the lungs, it goes instead to placenta. They get oxygen from the mother. And eventually that hole closes and becomes scar tissue called fossa ovalis. But before it's called foramen ovalis. And if it doesn't close, then actually in an adult, it's harmful to have a hole because you need to go, for blood to go to the lungs. And in that case, that's a problem. Sometimes you have to fix it surgically, but mostly it closes by itself. And another embryonic feature, which I was telling you, on the outside I didn't show, is this one. See, between the pulmonary trunk and the aorta, there's this little white thing. That's called ligamentum arteriosum, or arterial ligament. But what it used to be a blood vessel called ductum arteriosum. Because again, if any blood went by accident, you don't want the blood to go to lungs that are non-functional because baby is inside the amnion, there's no air there, it's a liquid, right? So if blood goes here, you don't want it to go to the lungs. So through this ductus, it goes back to the aorta. So it basically goes from the body to the heart, back to the body. Not like in the adult, it goes from the body to the heart to the lungs, back to the heart, and then back to the body. So these are like embryonic leftovers from something that used to be useful, but again, when after a person is born, this blood vessel, it closes, connective tissue develops and closes it off. If it doesn't, again, you have like heart insufficiency because you bypass the lungs. So, but anyway, so these are, you can see also a little bit of this over. Anyway, so that's essentially the heart structure and all the different things. So what I recommend to do, how to study this, there are two useful methods in lab. What you can do is, you can try to memorize, like look at this heart, memorize all the structures, and then with people at your table, take turns and explain without the paper. Memorize them as many as you can remember. If you forgot some, that's okay, but it's a lot better. If you read from a paper, it's not useful. But try to memorize and then show it to your other students at the table what you remembered. And then another person can do it. That's one way, because teaching is very good for memorizing, and sometimes people ask me, how do I remember all this stuff? Part of it is because I teach it, and if I didn't teach it like for several years, I'll probably forget some of it, right? So, but it really helps, not just like learning, like reading it, but explaining it to somebody. And second exercise that you can do is very useful. You can just take like tape and write and label the parts. So that's another useful exercise. If you label